how on earth does he make it around the world in one night? But the idea there is that parents are not trying to tell kids the truth. They're telling them a story that's meant to create a sense of wonder and enchantment and excitement. It's not about telling it the way it is. I think a lot of people are treating history like Santa Claus. It's not about telling the truth. It's about telling a story that they think is going to create a greater sense of patriotism or a greater sense of pride, right? And that's fine, right? I'm very non-judgmental in these kinds of things, but then you can't call it education. Just like you can't really call Santa Claus education. That's not what it is. It's fantasy. It's a stuff. And so I think when people are trying to restrict others from access to the truth, the same way that, they tried to keep me for many years from finding out the truth about Santa Claus because they wanted to maintain a certain emotional state in a child. I think as a nation, they're trying to create a certain emotional state, right? We talked about discomfort, we talked about guilt, all of these other things before. And I think, it's at the expense of truth that people, whole school systems, are making the decision to ban information that they know to be true, which is why I also linked it to the Santa Claus situation, because my parents know there's no Santa Claus. It's not like no one told them either, and they're telling me something that they think is the truth, but it's really not. The people banning the books, they know that slavery existed. Like, it's not even a controversial question, like, well, did it not? They know that it did. They just don't want to tell the truth about it because of the feelings that they feel that truth will bring. And I think it's very short-sighted.
Sure, I agree with that, but that gets back to the fear, right? People are afraid.
Exactly. That's why I think it's the root.
How did you get into this line of work? Your origin story, right?
Yeah, and again, it always comes back to the personal story.
Exactly.
The quick version is, I happened to be born at a very opportune point in time. I was born in 1971 in the wake of the Civil Rights Movement. There were all these sort of movements, to get more black people in jobs. I lived in a city where there was an IBM plant. I also lived in a city, and I found this out just a couple of years ago when my father sent me the newspaper article from 1968, that my neighborhood that I grew up in was actually a bunch of farmland donated by a wealthy and benevolent white man, a dolphin, who thought, I want to build a nice neighborhood, a Brady Bunch style middle-class neighborhood for black people. And there were tennis courts, it was just a beautiful neighborhood, lots of trees. And I grew up in this sort of Wakanda, this all-black neighborhood where my dentist was black, Dr. Brown, my elementary school principal was black, our attorney was black. I just was surrounded by all of these role models. And in many ways, it was a bubble. And I didn't know, kind of knew, but it was funny what white people thought of black people. But I didn't know up close and personal, and I didn't have a lot of trauma because I was surrounded by black people, the Cosby Show kind of way. So long story short, when I went to college, and I went to school in New Orleans because I played woodwinds, saxophone and clarinet, and I wanted to be in a jazz city, and it's a long story, but I ended up in New Orleans, and it was the Deep South, and I heard some of the ideas that white people had about black people, and it fascinated me.